Sacramento radio history. What could we possibly learn from it other than it brought us lots of rock and roll? Rock and roll radio was introduced to people in Sacramento in the 1950s on stations like 1240 KROY AM. Back then, everybody listened to AM radio. Hardly anyone listened to FM because people just didn't have the expensive receivers required to really pick up the sound. And it was really meant for audiophiles who liked classical music and jazz. But a lot of FM stations were just simulcasts of their AM sister properties. So AM stations were considered the dominant ones, the giants. From 1968 to 1974, 1240 KROY was the #1 station in Sacramento. They were untouchable. It was a market leader under the ownership of ASI and the general management of Dwight Case, who hired a series of successful program directors, Johnny Hyde, Bob Sherwood, and Chuck Roy. Johnny Hyde left KROY in 1970 to program 1320 KCRA AM, the sister station of the television station Channel 3, owned by the Kelly brothers. Meanwhile, KROY started to face a challenge from not only top 40 station Rock Candy, but also across the dial from San Francisco, KFRC, at 610 with Dr. Don in the morning. One of the reasons that a lot of people who grew up in Sacramento in the 70s remember both KROY and Candy is that a lot of the jocks worked at both stations. Dave Williams, who went on to become the morning voice of KFBK for many years. Terry Nelson, who was the voice of KCTC in the mornings for many years in the 80s. T. Michael Jordan, Wonder Rabbit, and others. In 1965, the FCC made a ruling that FM stations could no longer duplicate the programming of their sister AM owners, so they had to come up with their own programming, and that's what opened the door to freeform radio.
To start with, explains Ed, we were faced with a library of some 7,000 to 8,000 uncategorized records. Well, guess who categorized them? Again, this was part of, focusing in and making sure that enough familiar music was played in a consistent way to hold an audience. They really were working at holding an audience. And the neat thing for me, luckily, was I was interested in that as well. I thought it was too diverse. Of course, what I thought was too tight was still so much looser than anything going on.
Right.
Anywhere, and for a lot of years. But categorizing the albums and coming up with a format of sorts.
Did that take away the spontaneity, though, of people at the last second deciding, no, I want to throw this record on?
No, it didn't. And that's what the beauty of it was. It evolved to a color-coded A, B, C, D, E kind of thing.
Right.
With, I think, A's being new, the new things out of the new box. E's being oldies, which for us at that point was probably anything that came out before the station went on the air. And it went on the air in November of '68. So all your Motown stuff, all your early Beach Boys stuff, all your early Beatles stuff, Stones, that was oldies. Early Kinks, early British Invasion.
So really at that point,
was the oldie stuff.
You planned out a sequence, like a clock of categories.
Well, yeah, but it was a real open kind of clock, because this was secret information, too, by the way.
Right.
This was the deep secret that made KZAP the success it was, which I know the Earth Radio people and a few others would laugh at, and rightfully so, because through all this trying to get a bigger audience, it wasn't necessary to be #1. We had to make enough money to pay people decently. We had to stay on the air and upgrade equipment and all those kinds of things. But there was a principle involved that never really overrode the idea of ratings and making money, although that was of great interest. Another side tangent would be when New Day people sent me as a new program director back to Beltsville, Maryland to look through ARB diaries.
Really?
And it was like going into the CIA, which was right next door, actually, anyway. But the security required, I was literally searched for little cameras, because you couldn't take pictures of the diaries.
Wow.
I could make notes, but they provided me with a pencil and the paper. If I wanted to quote somebody, what somebody wrote in a diary, like they would say, the guy with the deep voice in the evenings. Well, we had to translate that into who they meant.
Yeah.
You know, just
Like,
it was naive kids running the whole show. We didn't realize the importance. We didn't really understand the relationship between the ratings and advertising.
Okay.
Came to Earth Radio for 3 years. When Earth Radio came on the air in '74, it was a tight version of what KZAP was doing, but only in the rock vein, not with all the peripheral kinds of music. And it really started to kick KZAP's butt in the ratings. In '78, KZAP was sold, first time to a big company with a consultant. Their changes to the format at first were laughable, but they got it tuned.
Abrams Star format.
I think so, and they got it tuned in real quickly to the point where they did beat us. And the management at KSFM freaked out and said, we have to have a consultant. We have to do something. So what they chose to do in the fall of '79 was get rid of Earth Radio and play disco. And I got out of there before the curtain landed. A few months ahead, I was the first one to secure another job, but unfortunately that meant that although I got out of there and got a job, I missed out on the $2,500 severance package that everybody got. So, you know, it was good and it was bad. And that's when I went to KROY, which at the time was playing an interesting pop mix, but was headed towards rock. And we eventually...
That was KROY FM?
KROY FM. We eventually wrestled the management to let us get more into rock. And again, based on the fact that we had a period there when we were playing a lot of new wave music, we beat KZAP handily. But then they jumped onto the new music, and we never really had the support we needed for outside advertising or anything, outside promotion. And we started to slip again. And that's when they sort of took over and decided it was going to be adult rock, and decided it was going to eventually lose the call letters and become KSAC, which was this grand idea to make it an incredible adult station, and it tanked. Yeah. Until eventually the call letters went with a sale to what's now the Eagle, which is, you know, same old songs over and over and over.
Were you there under the Johnson period?
Yes, I was. Okay. And it was an interesting psychological thing where we kept believing that it was going to start going our way, and that the people who were in positions that should be running the station would be able to, instead of having interference from above. And just when you thought everything was going fine, they'd kick you in the teeth and say, "Oh, we're making changes," or you're not in control of that anymore. And you know, what happened was it continued to die.